Hello there everyone, today we're going to do something that I've been pretty excited about for a while. So this is Hades by Supergiant Games. And for those who don't know who Supergiant are, they're the people that made Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre, which are all very, very solid games in their own right, and Transistor being my personal favorite of their previous works, but you know, they're really good and they know what they're doing. This one is different for a couple of reasons. One of the main ones is because it's actually an early access game. They've never done that before. They've never released a game early and had it sort of, you know, crowd idea funded as far as that goes, but they're actually going to try it out this time. I think it's mostly because, as we'll get onto a little bit later, this kind of seems like the game they've been willing to make for a while, and that kind of system allows them to really do it for sure, exactly how they feel that it should be done. What's also different about this, for me at least, is because this game is actually not on Steam. This game is on Epic's store, and I'm sure that's a storefront that's going to be in the news for the next couple of days, for other reasons, but for right now, I gotta say that I didn't even know that there was any other early access system on any other store. I had no idea that anyone else was actually doing anything like that. But turns out they actually are, and in this case we've got Hades on that system. I have noticed one really interesting thing about this game, as far as the whole, you know, not being done yet part goes, is that there's actually a countdown to the next major update on the title screen of the game, which, for one, is really impressive, just that they are confident enough to put that information out there and say, yes, in this amount of time we're going to get enough done to actually put up a major update for the game, which does help people get more faith in the product, as it were, and definitely helps things along. But also, it's really ambitious to me that people are doing that, and I think that's a really cool way to actually help push the system into people's minds and help push early access-like systems in general to a more legitimate sort of standpoint where people feel a little less hesitant about some of them, even for games that they were potentially excited about beforehand. Because the idea that you can just look on the title screen and know exactly when the next large content drop is going to be is pretty cool, and hopefully we'll hear to them being able to hold to those very successfully. So far it's been done pretty well by them. So what Hades actually is, it turns out, is a rogue-lite style of game, and well, you know that I do a lot of those on this channel, and that's because I really, really like the genre, as it were, or whatever you want to call it, a mechanical set, that kind of attracts different people for different reasons, but in this case, Supergiant's sort of big three things that they're known for are very much present in this game. They're kind of known, one, for their really excellent voice acting and narration style of things. That's sort of what made Bastion famous, was the narrator. And in this case, you have a bit of a twist on that because the narrator can actually be heard by your player character. Your character actually responds to the narrator and can hear everything he says, while the narrator conveniently just dismisses that and doesn't pay any attention to him at all. And this leads to some interesting sort of moments where you're going around looking at things and the narrator talks about the landscape or things like that, and your character actually sort of disagrees with him and tells you something different. And the other main things they're known for would be their art styles. All of their games are beautiful. They're known for being hand-drawn, just very pretty, and that is also the case here, as you can probably tell. It has a completely hand-done art style that has a lot of color and a lot of stylized effects and things, although it never gets too busy. Even in later levels where there's a lot going on screen, the game is never actually really hard to follow or anything like that. It's just very pretty. And the final thing they're kind of known for, as it goes, would be their very smooth combat gameplay style. Bastion and Transistor both had extremely smooth combat systems that flowed very well. They weren't overly complex, but they were as complex as they needed to be. They didn't feel repetitively simplistic or anything like that, and they were just very satisfying. And Pyre had very much the same idea going on with it, even though it didn't have combat in the traditional sense, but it did have very smooth gameplay in the same lines. And they tend to prefer this sort of isometric perspective, as it stands. And in this case, yeah, that's another thing that's here. The combat is incredibly smooth. It's very, very fast and frenetic, while also being very impactful. A lot of the weapons have a lot of weight behind them, and your attacks are definitely felt, which is very nice in a game like this. So that's something that they did a good job in both Bastion and Transistor as well. It's very much present here. Now, Hades is, as you can probably guess by the name, actually set in a Greek mythological setting. You are actually the son of Hades, the prince of the underworld, and you are trying to escape for reasons that I will not spoil here. And trying to escape leads you through Tartarus at first, because you start at the very bottom and you have to ascend, and you actually go through Tartarus, the Asphodel Fields, and Elysium, or the Elysian Fields. as well, and you meet all kinds of mythological characters along the way. And kind of interesting thing about it is it seems like this takes place at some point near the modern day, because a lot of the statements made by the characters seem to indicate that a significant amount of time has passed since Hades has actually come down here. And a lot of the sort of famous Greek heroes and things like that also seem to be present down here as well, so it takes place after all of their stories in mythology have happened. For instance, you meet Achilles down there, who has met an untimely demise by an arrow to the foot, and he's actually sort of your trainer. And you also meet the Fates, or well, the Furies, rather. At least one of the Furies is a boss who is really hard. And you sort of meet other characters as it goes along. Some of them are kind of crazy, like, say, Chaos, who you meet sort of with a choice random encounter. It will happen eventually, who is very creepy, and exactly how a sort of interpretation of Chaos would normally be if you read any sort of mythology about him, or it. And the game takes place mostly in a series of rooms, as the roguelite tradition is, that get harder and harder, and you ascend and eventually fight bosses and the like. And there are a couple of differences that make Hades actually, I feel, deal with some of the more common complaints about the genre in a pretty good way. So one of the most common ones you hear is that you feel very weak at the start. That generally in a lot of games like this, you have a very sort of anemic weapon that's meant to be upgraded a lot, so it starts out very not great, and you're eventually meant to find better things to eventually make yourself more powerful. And that is, of course, the idea behind this one as well. However, the whole starting out quite weak thing is definitely not the case this time around. All of the weapons you start out with are actually fully featured weapons with combos and special attacks and all that, and they're all very good. You don't actually get new weapons while you're down there. You can get it upgraded, though. The weapons include a sword, a spear, a shield, which can be thrown, Captain America style, and a bow. That's what's currently in the game, at least, although there are spaces in your the sort of pre-preparation room for more weapons that aren't currently implemented yet, but I'm guessing because their spaces are there, there definitely will be more eventually. And yeah, like I said, each weapon has its own suite of attacks, dash attacks, special attacks, things like that, so they're not weak feeling at all, and each one very much has a use, and there really isn't a sort of bad choice like there is in a lot of roguelite games, where there are things that are just meant to be weak. There are things that just kind of suck and you're meant to get rid of them eventually, or at least upgrade them. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, which is kind of interesting for people that definitely have that complaint. And the other big one is, as I'm sure a lot of people know in this genre, you're meant to get items and passive items and effects and upgrades and things to make yourself stronger throughout your run. And in this case, you actually always start out with something. It's random what you actually start out with, but you will drop down to the very first chamber of your run and you will have something generate, either a boon from one of the gods or upgrade to maximum health or something. You'll have something to start out with to make yourself feel stronger right off the bat, which is very useful. Now, how the actual upgrade systems go is pretty cool. Most of them are boons, blessings from the gods, the Olympian gods, that are trying to help you get out for various reasons. Usually it's kind of individual reasons. And you have gods like Ares, Artemis, and Zeus, as well as Athena and some others. Aphrodite is there as well. So all of these sort of Greek mythological Olympians are available, and each one has their own suite of sort of mechanics that they bring with them. For instance, Zeus obviously is mostly about lightning, so most of his blessings involve imbuing your attack or your dash or something with lightning to some effect, which is actually pretty strong. The chain lightning cast is probably my favorite. And Aphrodite's involve weakening enemies because you sort of make them infatuated with you and they don't want to hurt you, basically. And that also makes all of your attacks spew out hearts, which is sort of adorable. But yeah, so there's pretty much a build for everything here, and the build is actually gained by getting these various blessings. As is also tradition in the roguelite style of doing things, you also have a sort of meta currency that you gather while down there that can upgrade yourself permanently in between runs and make you able to more successfully get farther each time, hopefully. Although I will say that the game is actually very challenging, like really hard, but you know, even for a roguelite standard, it's pretty difficult. But yeah, and in this case, you actually have two technically meta currencies. You have skeleton keys and darkness, because Nyx is actually helping you out, the sort of personification of night and the dark in general, so darkness is actually something that can improve you. It takes the form of these purple crystals that you gather along the way, and also I've noticed that every time, at the beginning of every run, one of the weapons in your collection will have this purple glow around it, and if you use that weapon, it will give you a 10% bonus to any darkness drops that you get. So basically, if you want to farm darkness, that's how you do it. Then it also just gives you a bit of a sort of reason to use more than one weapon all the time and sort of try them all out. The skeleton keys are used to unlock things, whereas darkness is used to actually improve things. So with skeleton keys, you can do things like unlock the various weapons that I mentioned. You only start out with the sword, all the others need keys to unlock. And you also have a mirror in your room that can improve your stats in various ways permanently. And most of the improvements are locked off by skeleton keys, and once you actually have them unlocked, you can spend darkness on them to make yourself stronger. Everything from starting out with more maximum health, to getting a bonus to damage when you hit enemies from behind, to being able to dash more times in a row without the recovery happening. And these make you very powerful over time, and accruing them is definitely recommended. But one interesting thing about that system in this game is that there's actually a respec function, basically almost from the beginning. You can take out points that you've spent in the various upgrades and actually spend them somewhere else with full return. There's no sort of diminishing return, as in, like, you know, you won't get back quite as much as you spent or something like that. No, you can just rearrange your upgrades at any point you want before a run, which I think is really cool, and it again is another thing that sort of incentivizes you trying out different things, which is helpful in games like this. It just helps to make the experience more varied in general. The game also has a pretty interesting way of storytelling, which I suppose is another thing that Supergiant are kind of known for at this instance, but in this case it's a way of telling the story and doing dialogue between characters and things that I've never really seen before in a game like this. Normally roguelites have a story that is quite basic at the beginning and sort of unfolds on item descriptions and boss dialogue and stuff like that. It kind of goes slowly and based on where you actually go and what you kill effectively. If you think of, say, like The Binding of Isaac, the story is pretty threadbare at the beginning, but there's a lot more lore there that you learn over time as you unlock things. In this case, it's actually more of a sort of traditional action RPG-like way of telling the story, but they made it work in the randomly generated aspect of a roguelite, which is odd and, again, pretty ambitious, but very cool. You have things like characters that will, every run, actually say something different. When you get back to the palace after inevitably being killed by something, you will have the characters respond to you in different ways, talk about what killed you last time, berate you in some way. Cerberus just really wants you to stay there because he's adorable, and you'll have various characters actually come in that weren't there before that actually expand the sort of universe of NPCs that you can interact with. Even things like the boss of the of Tartarus, for instance, which is Megara the Fury, she actually appears after the first time you face her, or maybe the first time you beat her, I'm not sure, but I can't remember exactly which one it is, but the first time that you eventually get to that chamber and face her, she'll, after that, appear back in the palace and becomes a character that you can talk to and that actually has some sort of active effect in the story at that point because you've encountered her. They'll even have little bits of dialogue and narration and things based on the weapon that you happen to be wielding at that time, some of the blessings that you happen to have at that time. Like if, say, you go to Athena and you have a blessing from Zeus already, she might mention that before she offers you one of hers, just making note of the fact that you've seen her father recently. And you can even have very specific instances of things like referencing the fact that one of the boons that you have obtained is actually from a store instead of from a chamber. Normally, you know, the boons that you obtain are actually from completing a chamber and moving on, but some of them can be found in shops as well. And the god or goddess in question will actually comment on the fact that you're finding them in a shop instead of out there in the normal part of the world. It's pretty cool, and there's also a system that is sort of implemented partially right now that is involved in this, which is giving people ambrosia. You can find ambrosia by exploring various chambers, and you can actually give it to any character that you can interact with that you want. Even your father, if you want to, even though he's a total jerk to you, you can do that if you feel like. And each character actually has a sort of gauge of hearts, indicating how many times you've given them ambrosia. And right now, the only thing that it does is give you a keepsake, which is like a passive upgrade relating to that character. For instance, you can give ambrosia to Nyx for the first time, who will give you a black shawl as a keepsake, and if you have that equipped, every time you get darkness down in Tartar, well, I suppose in anywhere, if you get a darkness drop, it actually heals you for a percentage of how much darkness you obtain, because it's surrounding her and she's the sort of personification of the night. And keepsakes can also be upgraded by just wearing them all the time, and every time you beat an encounter with that keepsake equipped, it will go towards upgrading its effects eventually. But I'm guessing because there are so many hearts on this gauge for every character that eventually you'll be able to get maybe more than one keepsake per person, or at least bits of story and lore from these people as you increase their sort of relationship towards you multiple times. That's not currently how it works, but because of the way that it's set up, that's the way it looks like it's going to be intended to operate. It also does some other things a little bit different from traditional roguelite style, like for instance there's no map. Usually there is a sort of map of the chamber progress in the top right corner of the screen. That's just a very roguelite thing. Almost all of them have some sort of version of that. But in this case, there's actually no map at all. And instead, the doors themselves actually show you what reward the next chamber is going to give you. And in some cases, you actually have a choice between multiple paths with different rewards, which is a nice little welcoming bit of variety in terms of how the run can go at any given time. So yeah, that's what I mean when I say that this game seems kind of like the game they've been wanting to make for a while, because it's very ambitious and has a lot of sort of moving parts to it, but it's also really, really interesting and very well done so far. You'd be surprised at how much content the game currently has, despite the fact that it's in version 0.13. It still has just a very large amount of stuff to do. A lot of enemies to go through, a lot of boons to obtain, and just in general a lot of gameplay already, which definitely makes me excited for their future plans for it. It's available for $20 right now. That's going to be its price. I don't know if that's going to change at launch or at any point during the early access period. I have no idea. I don't see anything stating anything like that at the time. So we'll see what happens. And again, it is available on the Epic Store right now, so I will link you to that in the description below, and there are plans, of course, in the future, once it's hit its sort of full 1.0 release, to actually release it on other platforms. So I'm sure it will eventually be coming to Steam, maybe GOG, stuff like that. We'll see, but for right now, it is on the Epic Store. It goes a long way to differentiate itself in this genre that is currently getting quite crowded, but has a lot of very good competitors within it, and it does its own thing very well. I definitely have always enjoyed mythological aspects in games, especially like Greek and Egyptian, sort of a bit of a mythology buff, and seeing all the little references and things that they've crammed into this already definitely makes me hopeful for where it can go from here. So that's Hades in its current state. It's a ton of fun, and it already has a lot of content on offer for your $20. If you want to go check it out, please do so in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.